Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Property Journey podcast, episode 19. And in the last episode, we had previously touched on the fact, Roy, that we were maybe going to do a short, quick episode on HMOs. Mm-hmm. So here we are. As I said, I promised you all that I would do it. Here we are doing it. So HMOs, houses in multiple occupation. Briefly, Roy, could you just explain what an HMO is?
So an HMO is when there are three or more people living in a property who are not connected, as in they are not family members. So a typical person who would be renting a house is a family. So for instance, maybe husband and wife and their children, that's all counted as a family, that's all one. But if you were to put multiple people, like say for instance single people, or the most common one is students, together in a property, then it falls into a completely different category, and it's known as an HMO, which means there's different legal requirements involved.
HMOs, what way would you put it, have kind of risen in popularity. Mm-hmm. Now, we have continued to talk about the amount of things that we see online. You know, how do you earn money fast from, property? How do you, all these kind of, I nearly want to say influencers, because that is what they are doing, mm-hmm. influencing. And they say that HMOs is the best way forward. That's just their vision. That's how you make a load of quick money. What's your thoughts on that?
Like anything, there's no such thing as quick money. If you make money, you either have a real great skill or you've invested a lot of time and money into it. So HMOs have been popular for many, many years. Just a lot of people didn't really know about them. So they were, for decades ago, it was very, very common for student houses in areas like Belfast and Coleraine and what have you. Very popular for HMOs because you had two or three different people coming together, living in the one house. HMOs have risen in popularity recently because there's a lot of young professionals. It's a generation, a lot of young professionals, maybe in their early 20s. They've come out of university. They now have a career. They don't want to be living at home with their parents. They want a wee bit of, independence. They want a bit of freedom. So the way they do that is then they live in a house with other people. Normally an HMO is set up as like a very mini flat. So for instance, you would have a room. The higher end properties would have, within that bedroom, you would have your own ensuite. And then what happens is you share your communal areas, which is the likes of your kitchen, probably another separate bathroom, and then also a lounge and living area as well.
As you do say there, like the rise in popularity in them has been, sort of exponential recently. You do see a lot of reports, and I'm going to reference sort of England as one of those places, major cities like maybe London, places like that there, because the price of houses now are so high. Mm-hmm. You do begin to see now people are talking about HMOs, the price of what you're paying for a single room, yes, essentially. Yeah. So there has been a lot of talk about them, and I think now that people are then now sort of catching on what they actually are. But from an investor's point of view, what would be the benefits of potentially taking on an HMO in comparison, say, to just your normal, what we would call your buy-to-let sort of property that you'd be renting to your family?
There's a number of reasons. Probably HMO is generally a wee bit more hands-on and a wee bit more to and fro. So what I mean by that is, in a standard buy-to-let, you simply buy the house, you put it on the market, you find a tenant, and that's it. You could maybe not even speak to that tenant or have no dealings with that tenant from 6 months till 6 years if you're fortunate. Whereas an HMO, you're basically, you have a nice product, real good standard house, and you're dealing with more and more tenants. And they're maybe only staying, on average, they'd maybe only stay about 6 months, 9 months, because they're using it as a short-term footing until they either maybe find a house, buy a house, or they're moving jobs. So it's a wee bit more hands-on because you need to be dealing with, those changeovers a lot more conveniently. And then also maybe you have to be a wee bit more hands-on, for instance, the likes of checking the the common areas, are they kept clean? Maybe you are doing the cleaning. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of red tape, checking fire systems, electrical checks and tests. That all has to be done very, very regularly.
That sounds like a downside, Roy.
You see, a lot of people think property, this is great, let's jump into it. But yes, there's a lot of work. Years ago, when I was starting out, I did HMOs and I was completely hands-on. Now, I was doing everything, and I got into my routine where I was maybe leaving my job and then checking the properties on my way home. So that would have meant me cleaning, which I don't like to say too much in case I'm expected to do a lot more at home.
Just sunk himself there.
I'm sinking myself. So I literally would have been in cleaning the bathrooms, cleaning the kitchens, doing the dishes, hoovering all the common areas. You were then factoring in to make it efficient. You were doing viewings, you were showing people around, and then you're also dealing with problems too. So when you're bringing together a house with maybe 4 or 5 different people from different religion, different culture, different backgrounds of all sorts, you kind of become a wee bit of a mediator as well. So you were sorting that all out. So it was very, very hands-on, and I was stuck in the middle of it.
So that because the question I was going to ask was, are there any downsides and challenges? And obviously in the previous podcast when we did talk about it, as we've said, as you're bringing maybe 5 or 6 different people together, it's not going to be plain sailing. Everyone's not going to say, oh, that person's great and that person's great, and also happy families, in it. There's obviously going to be one person or 2 people that are just, ways of living. I know, for example, that, it could be sometimes difficult whenever I was living with my brother for a while, because his way of doing things was very different to the way that I done things. Yeah. And, when you're kind of living together, that sometimes doesn't exactly work out too well. But for example, then the benefit side of things of an HMO, is it more attractive because you're maybe potentially seeing, say, 6 rental payments coming in that's going to accumulate slightly more than what one rental payment would be in a buy-to-let property?
If run well and you have a good product, yes, there's going to be a higher cash flow and a higher profitability. But what can't be overlooked is it is like a mini business that you're running. So for instance, if you don't have a good product, you're not going to attract people. If you're not dealing with those issues that's being raised, then you're going to have tenants leaving very, very quickly, and you're going to be left with a lot of void periods. I was running at that time at a real high occupancy rate. It was something like 90%, but that's because I was on it. I was constantly advertising. Even though I had full occupancy, I was constantly advertising because I was getting ready for somebody moving out. So if somebody moved out, I had somebody else to try and move in. And occasionally you would have maybe been doing viewings when people were still there. But you got to know the tenants, you got to know their circumstances, whether they were maybe only there for a job, were they going to be there for 3 months or 6 months, or maybe they were looking for a house to move into. So you knew, when they were going to be moving out. Whereas if you're not on the ball, if you don't put the time and effort into it, and a lot of those tenants are moving out, you're going to be sitting with void periods, and the higher the void period, you're going to be hemorrhaging a lot of money.
And as you say, you could probably never predict as well when someone just decides that's them heading on. And, when you kind of see what circumstances around HMOs, what you do get is a lot of people have just disappeared out of the property and that's it. In terms of and I really don't want to get into the full nitty gritty of this, but the legal aspects of it, there is quite a bit more of a legal side with HMOs than your normal buy-to-let.
Yeah. From everything from start to finish, from the mortgage and the finance side of things, very few lenders will touch an HMO. If they touch an HMO, they'll probably charge a higher interest rate. So that's from your finance. From your legal point of view, the legal process, conveyancing is going to cost you a lot more because there's more work involved in it, because then you have a license to sort out and registration of it. Normally, I always recommend you don't leave that up to your solicitor. Bring in an HMO expert, because if that's not transferred over properly, then you effectively lose the license and you've just completely bought a devalued property straight away. Then from running the property, you've got higher house insurance, because the insurance company is going to look at it as more people together, maybe inconsistency, more void periods, more risk of damage, parties, fires, what have you. So your insurance is going to be a lot more expensive. And then there's the running costs of it as well, which are going to be, depending on how you operate it, but sometimes it's very common whereby you include, so your rent is all inclusive. So that means it includes your broadband, it includes heat, light, all of that, which then is a juggling exercise, because maybe one of the tenants doesn't really care much about heat and they're warm all the time, or you could get somebody in who you could have the heat pumping out at 25 degrees and they're still shivering, and then they're complaining that it's too cold. Likewise, again, running those costs, if you're not keeping an eye on it. I remember having it whereby I controlled the heat settings, and if there's a couple of times if you're not checking the property and there's a malfunction on the control system and the heat's maybe on 24/7, you're just burning money. But albeit things are slightly different nowadays, because you control a lot by your phone, whereas back whenever I was doing it, I was putting cages over the control panels and putting locks on them, and the tenants were still able to get round it. Likewise, you could have a tenant that's maybe plugging an electric fire or a blow heater into their bedroom. That's going all night. If you're not keeping an eye on the electricity consumption, that's costing you a lot of money. And then finally, you're into compliance. You need to have your fire extinguishers, your wired smoke alarms, your checks of those done regularly as well. So there's a lot of work involved in it. Put the effort in, put the time in, run it tightly, in the right area, and yes, you can make money.
Because I was even going to say, I remember, and I can't even believe I'm admitting this, but you remember in the newspaper, you always had the column I don't want to say it was classified. I think it might have been, but it was where all the planning permission was and
that's
all
right.
those. But there was always, every so often, you seen a wee notice going out about an HMO application. And I always remembered seeing that, kind of going, what was that?
So it's part of the process. So it's a planning. It falls within the planning remit, whereby a house, the way the planners are looking at it is, it's a house that's turning from a regular house into an HMO, which means it's effectively a change of use. So rather than the house being treated as a family and a few people coming and going every now and then, it's treated as maybe 5 individuals. That could potentially mean 5 more cars, more to and fro, maybe a wee bit more noise. And does that fit in well with the neighbourhood? And are the neighbours or the residents going to be happy with it? So it's not uncommon. I can think of a couple of scenarios where somebody's bought a house and their vision was turned into an HMO. So they bought the house, went to go through the planning route, and the next thing, all the neighbours kicked up and complete uproar, cost thousands upon thousands of planning fees to get sorted out. And it's not only the cost, it's time that has delayed the whole project by about 18 to 24 months.
That's what I was going to say, because whenever you says that was part of the planning process, then I kind of, in the back of my head, was thinking there, disputes with neighbours. They're clearly not going to want 5 or 6 individuals all moving into a house where, again, as you says, there could potentially be more problems with noise, or potentially a party here or there, or whatever it happens to be, and maybe 4 or 5, 6 cars maybe beginning to turn up outside the house, parking, all that kind of stuff. Like, you are into kind of that. And if you're not careful and not think about the choices that you're making going forward, looking at investing in an HMO, then you're into those potential issues then going forward. Then
you need to have a knowledge of knowing, either do you buy a house that's already HMO, which means you're maybe paying that wee bit more for it, or if you're buying a house that you're going to turn into an HMO, are you fairly confident that you're going to get the license okay? And have you got the right team behind you? For instance, the right architect who has experience of dealing with HMOs, and basically the planning side of things as well, as in, will it run smoothly?
I suppose nearly maybe touched on it there whenever you were mentioning, obviously if you buy an HMO that already has a license in place, you're paying slightly more for it, but the conversion has maybe already happened. So the rooms have already been converted. There's, all individualised locks in the doors. There's maybe been en suites all fitted. Everything's pretty much ready to go. If you're buying a property that hasn't got that, you're looking at quite a bit of money invested in the property to get it to the standard then?
Yes. So doing retrospective work is going to be more costly. So for instance, if you buy a house that is in real good order and you're going to turn it into an HMO, it's quite hard work or it's more difficult, it's more time consuming for electricians and the likes to put in the wired fire systems and all the rest of it, and the heating system. There's more work to it. Whereas the best way of doing it is you buy your property and you completely gut it and strip it, and then you do all the work to it. But no matter what, the regulations are very, very strict, very stringent, and it is going to cost a lot more to do. So that's why you need to know your market. Where are you going to place this HMO? Is there going to be demand for it? Because otherwise you'll have went to all of this expense. You're not going to get full occupancy, and therefore your return on investment is going to be low, give you a lot of headaches, or take up a lot of your time, and in fact not stack up for you.
And I suppose you probably, again, it's back to what we've previously talked about, what your plan is, what your goals are, what you're looking to achieve, whether you've got the finance for it or not.
Mm-hmm.
The next one then is and you've briefly mentioned that, just a quick note on it then, mortgage companies don't necessarily like to then finance the likes of HMOs if they know that's the route that you're going down.
Yeah, main reason for that is a bank wants to know that if you default and you don't pay the mortgage, they want to make sure that they can come in and take that house and sell it as quickly as possible. Whereas with an HMO, you're really, compared to a buy-to-let, it's normally a family, and they simply go through a process to get an occupancy order, and that's it. Whereas if you have an HMO, there's multiple people in that house. It's just harder work for them to get those people out. But not only that, the resale of it is a smaller market. That's one big thing people have to bear in mind here. You can go to a lot of seminars, you can go to watch all these online things, and they're selling these HMOs. Do this, it's great, you'll make loads of money. To get into that market, you are borrowing a lot of money and you're investing a lot of money. The big downside to it is, if you want out, you've a very small market to sell to. Whereas if you're selling a standard house in any area, you've got a market which is maybe first time buyer, investor, or potentially a home mover. So you've got those three types of people looking at your house.
Not to mention just how big each of those segments are.
Yes. Whereas to sell an HMO, you're selling only to an investor.
And not only that, but an investor that's willing to take on an HMO.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, I remember going to a seminar and there was a guy basically sharing his experience, and I always thought to myself, absolutely crazy. How is this a sales pitch to everybody? He ran through his experience, albeit yes, he had a lot of hurdles to go over and cost him a lot more than he had planned, and a lot of stress and a lot of hassle. That's par for the course. But whenever you broke it down as to how much he was borrowing, it was crazy. And this was a guy who was, I would count, standard job, but he was taking on this massive risk to make a few extra hundred per month compared over to a simple buy-to-let. But the big difference is, if the market turned on him or circumstances personally changed for him, it was going to be very slow and very painful for him to bail out.
And I suppose one of the things you probably to touch on, you can see it as you mentioned in Belfast there, student housing, a lot of HMOs in certain areas. I don't want to accuse people of doing certain things, but some of the houses are not great. They're slightly grim. Is that just, neglect? Is it of the house? I mean, is it just the type of housing that they're buying? The area that is it because it needs to be relatively cheap and cheerful because of the high turnaround? It's you see it in the news. A lot of people watching this will probably have seen it anyway. So it's, is it one of those kind of real sticky areas that it's not easy to explain?
you've probably mentioned, or you've hit the nail on the head there. When you say HMO, the first thing people think of is student accommodation. So that's a completely different market, quite rightly so. Years ago, there was that much of a demand by the students and a shortage of houses that literally maybe the standard of the house could have slipped, but yet people were still willing to rent those houses. Whereas if there wasn't that demand there, the landlords definitely would have had to keep a good product. I think that market's going to be changing, and probably has changed already, in that there are a lot of central town accommodation now being built for students, which is feeding the demand, whereby the students want a real good product. They want to be central. They want everything included in that bill.
And potentially pay £5 or £10 extra a week or a month.
Yeah, and in some cases, yes, they'd be willing to pay even more than that. But it's the simplicity of it, and not only that, they're in a big block of, say, flats, for instance, in the central of town. They've got all their mates potentially in one block, as opposed to being in houses. So I think that the student let market is definitely changing, and it's going to change a lot more. But to come out of the city, that's why you have to be very careful. Do your research, as in what areas suit an HMO and what is your target market. Is it that young professional, or is it maybe very common, maybe foreign nationals? They're coming here for a fairly short time. They're coming here for a job, and they're either just coming here to work and then maybe on a short contract to go home, or it's very common for foreign nationals to come in. They use that as a stepping stone. They've got a job, and they're using that then to find, once they get up on their feet, then they're going and renting or even buying a house.
Yeah. No, because that's what I mean, and I'm not saying, I wasn't tarring anyone with this, a brush there, but as you say there, a lot of people have heard it, student housing in certain areas, there's always been big debates about it. You see it in the news, that's probably what people first think of when they hear of an HMO. Yeah. And it's maybe not the young professional side, which are maybe sitting in a house nicer than some of our own. Yeah. And they're sharing shared facilities that are probably nicer than some of our own. Yeah. And that style of HMO and house is becoming more and more popular, as you can see in the likes of England and the mainland. In terms of them, we sort of maybe touched on that then, the trends and the demand then, as you're saying there, the trends for that student style of HMO is beginning to kind of drop slightly in certain areas.
I don't have the data to back it up, so don't want anybody hitting out at me, but just my own personal knowledge and a bit of research. It's not an area that I am passionate about now, so I don't really look into it. But clearly there are more and more central town apartments being built for the likes of students, so clearly that shows there's a demand there. And then also I have a lot of experience where I've seen people lose their license for student houses which are out of town, so clearly that shows then that it's a squeezing of the market in those typical traditional student areas in Belfast.
Well, to pick up on what you were saying there, it does seem to be that there's been a new announcement of student housing near enough what you would feel every 1 to 2 months. Yeah. There's a new project coming on, another 900 rooms and or 1,800 rooms, or 2,500 rooms, whatever it happens to be. There is a lot of these coming on board, so if you've got that readily available, you would expect the uptick to be there. Yep. And the likes of your traditional HMOs, they start to decline slightly as more and more people pick up on it. And that's the other then point I was going to say was then obviously then the likes of your young professionals then in certain areas, that's going to be more and more popular. So if you have the good product and you've got a potential influx of jobs coming to a certain area or whatever, and that it's going to be a slightly more better job, for example, you're going to have a lot more people coming to an area. If you haven't got property to be able to sell to them, or they're unable to buy a house because the supply is not there, the likes of your HMO is going to basically mop up those people into that area. And you've kind of touched again on the management tenancy side of things. Like, you know, if you're unwilling to get your hands dirty, essentially, it's going to be rather difficult. Is it something that you could hand over to a property agent to do, or, you know?
Yes, there is that opportunity, but certainly my advice would be get a specialised agent, and not every single estate agent or letting agent would touch it. So, but I do know there are some specialists out there, and yes, go to them, because likewise, it's a completely different rental market, and it's knowing the right tenant. So you need to know your interested party, and basically make sure they're being targeted in the right way. It's not always, what I found was, for your traditional buy-to-let, you used to use the likes of Property Pal, Property News, whereas whenever I was doing the HMOs, that was the last place I was advertising. There was other platforms and other areas that I was targeting, which were far more successful. So that's why a specialist is going to know those areas and target them.
Yeah. Final couple of points then that I wanted to make was the setup and the design of the HMOs are obviously, as you say, some of the older ones, maybe one suite, it's one shared bathroom, one shared living room, one shared kitchen. With that, are you running into potentially a lot of issues? Someone's hogging the bathroom, someone's hogging the kitchen, someone's decided to take over the TV in the living room. You know, are you running into that issue because it's not designed maybe slightly more strategically? If you're going in and designing it yourself and you're putting ensuite bathrooms in, well, you're not having to worry about sharing a bathroom, because most of them probably would have a shower, a toilet and a sink. You don't really need to use the other bathroom. You know, your kitchen space, you could have maybe 2 cookers in it, for example, and 2 microwaves. If you can't sort that out amongst yourselves, well, you know, you must be cooking a feast or something. Is that kind of where the design and the setup of the actual HMO would come in?
Absolutely. And it's knowing your target market again. You know, I've seen HMOs in areas whereby the project house that they've stripped and redone, it's worked well, that the bedrooms are of a real good size. They're still able to squeeze in an ensuite and a very, very simple kitchen. So what I mean by a simple kitchen, I mean just simply big enough for maybe a sink and a bench to put a microwave on. But then again, it's knowing your market, whereas maybe some people would want the communal kitchen to be able to cook loads of space. That's where they're going to do all of their cooking. So it's all about knowing who's going to rent the property. But generally, no matter what, nowadays people don't want the thought of sharing a bathroom with somebody else, and that's why they want their own ensuite, no matter how small it is. At least then, as you say, nobody's hogging it, and there's no rows as to how it's been left.
I winged in and out of an HMO many years ago, and I was in probably maybe 2-3 times a week, in and out, and the thought of sharing the bathroom, which we did, but you know, when you kind of looked up and you seen the mold in the ceiling and stuff, and obviously people weren't opening the windows, and you know, they weren't really cleaning up after themselves, it does kind of, you know, put into perspective of, would I have rather stayed in a slightly more up class, wee bit more modern HMO? 100%. Would I pay the extra money for it? 110%. You know, because it's you have to be keen enough, like, you know, if you're going to do it. Right, final thought then, because I want to keep this quick. What is your final thoughts then on HMOs? What would be your piece of advice then if people are thinking about it, and or if they're already in it? What would your piece of advice be?
If you're thinking about getting into it, I would say do your homework. How much money have you to put into it? Do your research on the location, and do your homework on the figures to make sure it's all going to stack up for you. And finally, how much effort do you want to put into it? Whether you want to be hands-on or hands-off. If you are already in the game, I would say it's never a bad idea to review. So review your product, make sure, is it to a standard? You know, sometimes you can be very biased and you think it's good. go and get a friend, go and get a stranger to go and take a look, walk in and say, tell me what your view is on this, because it might be the case whereby, you know, you simply give it another lick of paint or tweak it or do something, and you could lift your profit margins. Might even be the case of, you know, installing, you know, LED TVs or something on the wall. You know, those sorts of things are better broadband, you know, fiber optic and all the rest of it. So review what you have at the minute, look at the product, look at the figures, and is it being run tightly enough?
That's HMOs in a nutshell. Didn't want to go into too much detail, but I know we had a couple of questions coming in about HMOs. If there is anything else, ping us a message. We'll see if we can point you in the right direction with our, well, Roy's limited experience. I have no experience, so only just staying in one. So if there is anything else, give us a shout. Big episode coming up next time. We're going to be doing a little bit of research on the budget, upcoming budget from the Labour government. It'll be interesting, but we will be talking about some of the speculation that's been surrounding it. Obviously, we have about another month or so until the budget's announced. But in the meantime, next episode we'll be discussing the speculation and seeing how it could affect people in terms of the property. So thank you very much, everyone. Episode 19, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you.